Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my presentation. I was able to accomplish this research through McNair, through their TRIO grant, but also through my mentors, Dr. Christopher Schedler and Xavier Cavazos. So without further ado, Mestizaje through Epidemic, Curanderismo as Spiritual Healing, and Alejandro Morales' The Ragdoll Plagues. In Alejandro Morales' novel, The Ragdoll Plagues, Morales' focus on the Chicano experience through epidemics illustrates the impacts of colonization, racism, and environmental degradation in colonial and post-colonial societies. Divided into 3 books set in 1788 colonial Mexico, 1970s fictional town of Delhi, California, and 2050 fictional transnational region La Mex, the book begins with Dr. Gregorio Revueltas, later following his 2 descendants, each with his patronymic, as they battle infectious diseases within their lifetimes. Each of their struggles present a larger commentary on Mexican-American history through its migrations, the evolutions of racism, effects of physical and social illnesses, and the future impact of the climate crisis. Through individual and collective contamination, epidemics and pandemics become a central metaphor for hybrid sociocultural behaviors, miscegenation, and the transition to a new model of nationhood or post-nationalism that removes borders and racial hierarchies in North America. Depicting spirituality and supernatural forces through the borders of science and technology, Morales' text demonstrates religious parallels to Christian sacrifice and salvation through traditional folk healing. Though the subjected positionality of women within the text should be questioned, the text still reflects human brutality and caregiving within Chicano history, where genetic adaptations respond to disease and pollution, making the case for the healing power of spirituality rather than organized religion and faith. But first, before analyzing the text, we must first analyze the folk healing behind it. Curanderismo, medicina del campo. Curanderismo as a discipline is a blend of historical and cultural traditions from New and Old World healing practices. This includes the herbal lore of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, such as the Aztecs and Mayans, medieval and European witchcraft, the Judeo-Christian principles of the Spaniards, Arabic medicine from the Moors, Greek and Roman Hippocratic medicine, and of course, modern spiritualism and scientific medicine. In short, it is best to think of curanderismo as a cultural tapestry of healing. What makes curanderismo significant is that for generations, it has been a free community health resource highly accessible to minorities and the lower class. It does not require private or federal health insurance, nor does it include making appointments, referrals, translators, and filling out paperwork. Most often, the healing occurs in the curandero/curandera's very own home. According to Trotter and Xavier in the text, Curanderismo, Mexican-American Folk Healing, curandero/curanderas perform healings for many modern illnesses such as marital disruptions, alcoholism, infidelity, bothersome supernatural manifestations, cancer, diabetes, and infertility. But most are notable for their healings against mal de ojo, susto, caída de molera, empacho, and limpias. Curanderismo's use and lore within the spiritual and supernatural marks cultural distinctions and a historical significance rooted in colonization and a resurgence in reclaiming the indigenous spirit of our ancestors. Dr. Alicio Chio Torres from the University of New Mexico states, Curanderismo pulls together elements of a multiplicity of worlds, of the past, of the present, and perhaps of the future as well, as conventional medicine begins to reimagine itself as a discipline that encompasses ancient traditions of healing. Dr. Torres's observation provides us with a rationale for undertaking this type of literary analysis. The multiplicity of worlds contained within curanderismo that can transcend time and to which modern medicine is rooted is what Morales portrays in The Ragdoll Plagues. Morales' use of epidemics and individual and collective contaminations act as representations of an evolving hybrid consciousness or mestizaje occurring within the U.S. and potentially its future. Book 1, La Mona Nueva España. In Book 1 of The Ragdoll Plagues, author Alejandro Morales incorporates epidemics and folk healing using magical realism to portray hybridity and the development of the hybrid consciousness. Spain's top physician, Dr. Gregorio Revueltas, arrives in Mexico City to suppress La Mona, an infectious plague that leaves its afflicted covered in bruises, consuming the patient in red blotches, and giving the individual the scrawny appearance of a rag doll, hence the title of the novel. Supported by Father Jude, a disfigured monk, and Revueltas' descendants who appear as visions or apparitions, Gregorio terminates the persecution of curanderos, installs infrastructure that improves sanitation, reduces crime, and increases medical access. An orphan child who is conceived from the last infection of La Mona, thus born from pollution, represents the new generation who will fight for Mexico's independence, leading to the struggles and migrations we see in the modern day. Book 2, AIDS and the Chicano-Chicana Movement. In Book 2, the Anglowoman Sandra Spears' contraction of AIDS in 1970s California is used to represent the social illness of discrimination and racism in the United States. Morales offers an alternative of environmental justice and a borderlands ideology while demonstrating the spread of curanderismo to those outside of the Chicano-Chicana culture through Spear, making the case for spirituality and healing, which develops hybridity or a hybrid consciousness. Gregory, a descendant of Dr. Gregorio, was a worker at the Santa Ana Clinic during the 70s in Delhi, California, whose story begins and ends with the Anglo-woman Sandra Spear, an aspiring actress he falls in love with. Gregory is obsessed with Sandra, often relegating her value as a beautiful white woman interested in Chicano-Chicana culture and history, constantly sexualizing her body where their lovemaking becomes ritual. Gregory states, quote, "I looked down from her eyes and found her breasts like sacred shrines of memories from which I suckled the past," end quote. This male gaze is representative of the masculinist literature and poetry written by Chicanos during the Chicano movement, these writings often defending equality, but ultimately flawed and hypocritical in their positionality of women as either sacrificial, sexual objects, caretakers, or all the above, often working women within the binary of virgin or prostitute, good women and bad women, their service or disobedience to men. Throughout the text, Sandra is depicted as a goddess, a high priestess, and most importantly, Gregory's cypress tree. Gregory's connection of Sandra to the tree reveals Morales' attempt at signifying a Chicano experience, one that argues for equality and the preservation of the environment, while building a representation of hybridity through Sandra, even as the blank slate that she is. Gregory, of course, is concerned with the ills of industrialization, the destruction of nature, and the violent history of the land and the people idyllic to the Chicano movement. Referring to the barrios of Southern California as the real ass land, the origins of my Indian past, demonstrates Gregory's connection to Mexican-American history, whereas the tree of his parents' property suggests a greater connection to his genealogy and nature in an industrial world. He states, "The behemoth tree was like pure, delicate crystal, forever in danger of being broken, cut down by men and women concerned more with industrial profit than the preservation of natural life. Here, next to this well-planted tree, I felt rooted in this earth." Morales' representation of Sandra as the tree, her fingers growing like roots penetrating and entwining through Gregory's body and soul, depicts Sandra as another source of history, another intersection of hybridity. But of course, all of Sandra's personality, talent, and hybridity gets undermined by Gregory's male gaze. But it's interesting as a modern-day Chicana reading the text and understanding the attempted nuance, particularly in Morales' use of illness and contamination, the process of healing, and the sacrifice of the female body as a form of hybridity, where one could even argue that only women are capable of reaching a true mestiza consciousness, their bodies intersecting within all our social issues. Because Gregory is Chicano, he experiences racial discrimination, the tension present from Sandra's father, Bill, who views Gregory as a contamination on his daughter and his social political beliefs. The social contamination of racism extends to Sandra within her diagnosis of AIDS, acting as a metaphor for contamination, thus crossing her hybridity towards realistic experiences of racial discrimination. Sandra is often described as, quote, "a decomposing creature bursting with foul-smelling miasma, spilling fluids and dropping maggots in her wake, and decorated with a crown of filthy flies," end quote. Sandra loses her job at the local theater where the director and crew do not want to work with her. Her doctors and nurses continuously refuse to treat her, regarding her as, quote, "a human scourge capable of destroying humanity, and a research case, a human disease puzzle to be solved," end quote. As Sandra's condition gets progressively worse, with reddish blotches and purplish lumps festering throughout her body, with open sores, deformed limbs, swollen eyelids, and a large tongue with protruding lips, Gregory takes Sandra to Mexico City to spend her final days in the care of curanderas. Interestingly, Morales depicts AIDS as a viral adaptation of La Mona, the epidemic from Book 1, when the curanderas diagnose her, stating, "It is an ancient plague. It is a disease that makes you look like a clown with black rings round your eyes, bruised, deformed arms, and a white speckled tongue. Your limbs become weakened to the point where they are like the arms of a raggedy doll." In a final ritual by the curanderas, Sandra is depicted as transcultural, transhistorical, dancing and drinking as serpents wreath out from her punctured skin, completing her transformation into the serpent goddess Cotlique. The curanderas' treatments ultimately ease her spirit before she passes back in Delhi. Like with Dr. Gregorio and the death of Laurinda and Marisela in Book 1, Sandra's death symbolizes how healing can be achieved through spirituality, how the process of illness and healing can develop hybridity. Book 3, Environmental Plagues and Latinx. In Book 3 of the Ragdoll Plays, Morales focuses on the morality of the New Age social behaviors of the technocratic confederation Latinx, composed of Canada, the US, and Mexico, that prioritizes efficiency over humanity. The Gregory of Book 3, who works as a medical director in gene engineering, is racing against spontaneous and sentient environmental plagues in the mid-21st century, 2050 AD. And like his predecessors, he comments on human disconnect caused by new socioeconomic hierarchies, pollution, and advanced technology. Gregory attempts to cure his society by uncovering why certain individuals born in Mexico City have a leukemic white blood cell count and yet are strong and healthier than their counterparts against pollution and hypercancers that attack along the coast. After performing illegal blood transfusions, Gregory discovers that a mutation has developed that allows the individual to survive and adapt to the most polluted conditions on Earth, an evolutionary trait that can cure others through blood transfusions of the opposite gender. Within this healing practice, Mexican blood does not continue as a metaphor for contamination, but for healing and resiliency. But as rumors spread on the properties of the blood, riots begin to erupt by the sick who want to be miraculously cured, leading to mass shootings, cover-ups, and the enslavement of Mexico City residents as commodities, often within arranged marriages to ensure immunity within families for generations. Though Mexican blood, once viewed inferior, becomes the cure against pollution in a capitalistic society akin to an empire, Morales argues that the spread of mestizaje can only be applied through the medical commodification of individuals and their bloodlines that become so crossed the mestizaje becomes ingrained within society and culture. For a novel where healing transcends time and place, Morales proposes 3 questions. How can blood be a metaphor for contamination? How does physical and social illness within pandemics reintegrate individuals within a broader society? How does individual and collective contamination make the case for the healing power of spirituality rather than religion and faith? Through the Ragdoll Plagues, Morales argues for hybridity, supporting a mezcla of indigenous and ancient healing to modern scientific medicine to heal the violence and injustice of Mexicano colonial history and its evolutions within recurring pandemics. Sickness and healing in the Ragdoll Plagues present spirituality as a greater healing force compared to traditional organized religion and scientific medicine. Throughout the text, the depictions of disease present Morales' beliefs of hybridity while highlighting colonization, racism, and environmental degradation. Through the significance of women, Morales foreshadows the sacrifices to reach a post-nationalist society and how the development of a mestizaje and a mestiza consciousness is necessary to bring equity to a community. And though ambiguous, the Ragdoll Plagues is an amalgamation of folk healing and spirituality within the genre of historical and science fiction that entertains and questions our methods and modes of healing and sacrifice within pandemics, including our generosity and selfishness. Thank you. Any questions? For Gabby, I think her sacrifice in terms, because she committed suicide in the end of the book itself with her robotic arm by causing an electrical surge throughout her body. And though the first deaths of Laurinda and Monica of Marisela represent a new age for Mexico, Mexico entering into independence, and whereas Sandra's death represents the processes of spirituality and how spirituality has a greater effect on our healing than religion, traditional religion, and scientific medicine. The death of Gabby, for me, I believe, not only represents like the destruction of when we try to accomplish perfection in such an advanced technological society, but it also suggests the death of the spirit itself when you cast away your humanity. Any other questions? I think it would be a book going back and maybe giving the perspective of all the women in each text, because I'm more interested in that as well, because I feel that though Morales captures all these interesting ideas, he fails to kind of give a universal perspective, a women's perspective to the events. And really something I kind of left out in the short essay was a lot of the subtle ways that he casually jumps over genocide and jumps over how 16th century medicine actually led to the decimation of many of the native indigenous populations. Not only that, but it also persecuted curanderos and all the really bad things that have kind of happened throughout human history. But yes. Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, everyone.